Okay, here I'm going to go over different types of cannabis. Cannabis Indica, Sativa, Ruderalis, and also Hemp Cannabis. Now, while these different types are kind of ingrained in the industry, we're going to learn here that the differences may not be as great as you may initially think. So Indicas, Sativas, Ruderalis, and Hemp Cannabis may have different looks or different morphologies, but the actual difference between these plants may not be as great as you may think. So I put this disclaimer here because there's different morphologies that allow us to classify this cannabis, and that's typically what's used to denote them into different categories. However, the phenotype does not always match the genotype. Some backgrounds of plants are also not well known due to the blending of genetics. And while general characteristics are presented, please realize that plant behavior may not match the cannabinoids it can produce. So this naming inconsistency, there's a disconnect between research and the general public. Much of this traces back to the underground market now hitting legal challenges that have opened up the market for more varieties. Two plants by the same name may not be the same genetics. So we're getting into something that may look initially the same, but when we kind of go into the microscope and then look at the scientific end of it, we're seeing some great differences that do occur. So why can names be unpredictable? Well, breeders have been making crosses and documenting, so we would think they'd be accurate, but without genetic markers as being tracked, there is a high odds of mix-ups occurring just from grower error. Also, the possibility of misinformation being spread for the purpose to protect breeders' varieties cannot be ruled out. So there are two kind of factors at play that probably contribute the fact that these names aren't necessarily directly matching up. So how are names defined? Well, often the structure or morphology of the plant defines the variety. This does not take into consideration the chemical profile of the plant. It creates an inaccurate correlation. So we're kind of basing it on morphology, and as you see here with the plug, if it fits, it's got to be this variety. If it looks like this, it's got to be this, and that's sadly not the case here. So genotype versus name, it's possible for the same variety from two different suppliers to have vastly different chemical profiles. Suppliers will often say if you find a good strain, stick with that supplier, but this is not a good long-term solution. This variability presents a huge challenge, especially for the medical market, and as a result, many have chosen to go with extractions rather than actual plant material so that they can know exactly what they're getting each and every time. So what does this mean? It means do not trust the name matches a clearly defined set of effects. We see here with the mouse and the cat, the mouse should not always be trusting the cat here. Pure extractions will ensure a consistent chemical profile regardless of the starting material. The extractions can be found in purified products, which reduces variability compared to use of the flower. Genetics versus observations. There are databases being constructed, so future understanding of cannabis genetics will become clearer. However, general characteristics of the three main types of cannabis will be presented here, along with some concerns of those classifications. But we are starting to pool a greater data set, seeing what we see, and also genetic markers for the cannabis plant. So Cannabis Indica, well, the origin is commonly countries of Pakistan and Afghanistan, where colder climates with shorter seasons. That's kind of where the indica can be traced back to. The morphology, I call it the George Costanza of plants. It's short and stocky. These leaves kind of have this morphology as we see here, short and stocky leaves. The general behavior is conducive to indoor growing, where space is often limited due to its morphology. These dense plants with broad leaves lead to heavy production with a possibility of 4 to 6 crops per calendar year. It's often marketed as offering relaxation, decreased nausea and pain, and good for nighttime use. Sativa, its origin is found more towards the equator, where the climate tends to be warmer and longer. Also, the average day length is stable over the course of the year, so sativas are thought to originate near the equator. Okay, and here looking at the sativa's morphology. These are considered to be like the giraffe of cannabis plants. They're tall and they're thin. Leaves are long and thin, which is kind of the opposite of indicas. They're physically the biggest of the three varieties, and they tend to have more continuous growth habit, leading to more airy appearance. They can grow up to 15 feet tall and can produce higher yields, but sometimes it takes a little bit longer for them to get to this stage, so it comes at the cost of sometimes longer flowering times. The market is as increased creativity for people looking to get things done in daytime use. Again, this is what they're marketed as, but this doesn't necessarily mean all sativas will have this. So the indica versus sativa debate. Despite clear distinction, there's widely presented in the marketplace, actually there's very limited scientific evidence to support the separation between the indicas and the sativas. Are there morphological differences? Well, yes. However, the strain classification does not match the chemical profile. Sativas and indicas can have similar chemical profiles despite very different morphologies. So indica or sativa, the specific classification does not correlate with the particular effect or compounds produced. And this is a big point to kind of remember here. While plants look different, this is the only distinction between the two. So the chemical profiles can be the same, even though they may look very different. And this is despite what typically is marketed as one producing one effects and another. They can actually produce very similar effects. Ruderalis is an auto-flowering cultivar of cannabis. Its origin is kind of in cold regions of countries like Russia and China. And this could be a distant relative of sativa potentially, but because it's auto-flowering, it's kind of its own classification. It's the new kid on the block. The morphology is, I call it the hummingbird of plants. It's small and fast. It's recognizable by its small leaves and minimal side branches. It has this kind of rougher, shaggier plant structure with thicker stems. Now it's an auto-flowering strain which eliminates the need to be precise with photoperiod, as it will flower after 3 to 4 weeks of growth no matter the time of year. It's ready to harvest 70 to 110 days from seed, so this is an advantage of having this auto-flowering. It kind of becomes a robot, kind of becomes like automated. It's often used as crosses with other strains to increase yield and have the auto-flowering characteristic carry over so that growers don't have to worry about the photoperiod adjustments. Naturally low in THC is how it's marketed. Short life cycle, advantageous from being incorporated into other hybrids to kind of give the best of both worlds. Kind of gives that quick cheetah-like turnaround time, and it can kind of create this mixture of two different varieties with good potency and auto-flowering plant, which is what growers typically find advantageous. The general morphological summary here, indica, sativa, ruderalis, you can kind of see now the comparison between the three and how they look very differently. But again, keep in mind the chemical profiles that they produce could be very similar.